Sup, guys? It's Toad. This is Better Off Dead. January 13th, Monday. Back with you again after nice bounce back Saturday. Horrible Sunday, 1-5. I don't even know what to tell you about that. Colorado just didn't get there. I mean, not every bet's going to get there, and that one wasn't that far off, to be honest. And I thought I made the right decision staying away from the Northwestern one, as Michigan State is just really good, and they just trounced them again. Colorado at least had shots to win that game. Penn State did cover. That was my only one. And of course, as a 2-point underdog, they cover by losing by one and not even getting the outright win. Okay. But still fine. It's a win. Then NBA starts getting really frustrating. Chicago Bulls, I think they basically had a wire-to-wire cover in that game, even though they were kind of losing for a lot of it. They were right within that number of 4 or whatever it was pretty much the whole time. They wound up losing by 5, missing by 1 point. Boston Celtics statistically kind of dominated their game, and they just still couldn't get margin, and they wound up almost losing the game. They only win by 1 point, put themselves in an early hole. But if you look at the stats in that game, they had I think at least 16 more field goal attempts in the game, and they had 15 more rebounds or something like that. Stats like that, it looks like it should be a pretty dominating win. And no, they almost lose the game because the Celtics, again, died by the 3, or almost did. And they only shot 20-something% from 3 for the second straight game, while the Pelicans shot almost 50%, I think, 40-something% from 3. And that was the difference between the game. Total outlier 3-point shooting again in that one. And then, of course, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they mismanaged the clock early in the first half there. Or I think it was it in the first? I don't remember. There was some clock mismanagement there where they let more time run off the clock than what they should have. And then, which I think resulted in a field goal instead of them potentially getting a touchdown. I can't remember exactly what it was. I wasn't paying attention to it, but I know that they then retook the lead. Looked like they were probably going to win the game, especially after Washington turned it over on downs, trying to get a touchdown, down 4. I think early in the fourth quarter, maybe is what it was, or late in the third. And then what does Tampa do? Oh, yeah, they fumble it right back over in their own territory and hand Washington a touchdown after Washington had stalled out in the red zone. Pisses me off so much. Then Tampa winds up only tying the game. And then what are you going to do? You give Washington 4 minutes left. It comes down to it, at that point, the last team that has possession is going to win the game, because Washington's defense is not going to stop you, but you're not going to be able to stop Washington, and that's what happened. And Washington got into field goal range and was able to run all the rest of the clock out and win at the end on a very makeable field goal. Abysmal. And that's the only pick that I've gotten wrong. I'm in pick'em pools for NFL playoffs. That was the first one that I got wrong, and it happens to be one of my 2 bets. I was 5-0 or 4-0 before that. We'll talk about today. And then what was my other loss yesterday? Hockey. Tampa with a 5-2 win over the Pittsburgh Penguins. I lost on the Penguins. That game was 2-1 in the third period, man. The final, I'm assuming there was at least one empty netter there. I didn't even look, but that game was definitely closer than the final looked. Terrible, terrible day. And today I'm skipping the whole card. Nothing that really appeals to me here. The big game of the day, if you want to call it that, in college basketball is UCLA and Rutgers. UCLA ranked 22nd in the country. It's a spot where you might look at it and think that maybe it makes sense to fade UCLA, but I'm not sure that it does. They're up from 2.5 to 3 as a road favorite. They are already on the East Coast, so I know this is an unfamiliar venue for them, but they at least already did just play in Maryland, and they lost again badly after Mick Cronin called his team out and called them, I think he said that they were slackers. What did he call? I forget exactly what the word was that he used. It was crazy. I'm like, holy crap. I didn't know how that was going to go over, and it didn't go over well, obviously, although going out to Maryland as a Pacific Coast team not used to having to travel like that is not an easy spot either. Maryland's a good team, significantly better than Rutgers is. So after these last couple of games, UCLA is actually stepping down in class to face Rutgers here, and Rutgers also, I guess, kind of is stepping down in class from their last game because they, I don't know, actually, because they played Purdue. I don't know, as far as these rankings are concerned, I don't know if they're actually that accurate. Maybe Purdue is still better than UCLA, but Rutgers is coming off a few big games here. Big game over against Purdue where they lost again. They do have UCLA coming into their house, so I expect both teams are going to be focused on this one. So then it might come down to which team is the better team, which is Maryland, or excuse me, which is Rutgers, or what am I saying? Which is UCLA, excuse me. Obviously, UCLA is the better of these two teams. What am I even saying? UCLA and Rutgers is that game. Minnesota is at Maryland in the other Big Ten game, which Maryland's a huge favorite in this one. I mean, up from 14.5 to 15 with juice. I'm not going to come in and try to touch Minnesota, man. I mean, the spot to play them was basically that Ohio State game. They are coming off a real ugly loss, though, to Wisconsin, so they might want to bounce back from that. So when you lose that ugly to anybody, yeah, you're probably going to be focused a little bit in Maryland. Well, really, they did just beat UCLA after playing Oregon close. So it is actually kind of a game where they might overlook Minnesota a little bit. So I mean, if you were going to force me to play that game, it might actually be taking the points with Minnesota, but obviously not going to do that. And then BC is at Notre Dame. Notre Dame sitting at 11 as a favorite, 11-point favorite. 68% of the cash on them, 50% of tickets evenly split, though. So Notre Dame looks like they are getting the cash. I think to the outside viewer here, they're looking, wait a minute, Notre Dame's 7-9, BC's 9-7, Notre Dame's laying 11 points. I mean, that just doesn't look right. It looks like a very misleading spread there, but obviously what the odds makers are telling you is Notre Dame has faced a way more difficult schedule. And yeah, I mean, they beat Georgetown early on. Georgetown kind of stepping up a little bit. They're kind of moving back up. They're not terrible. Notre Dame did lose to Rutgers at home, which that doesn't look that great. Losing to Elon at home doesn't look that great either. Elon, not that bad for the conference that they're in, though. Rutgers, not great. But then Notre Dame lost to Houston pretty competitively, Creighton competitively, Georgia on the road. I mean, those teams are all pretty good. They lost to North Carolina in there, Duke. NC State, not really that bad either. I mean, they lost to Georgia Tech as well, beat Syracuse. So, I mean, Notre Dame has faced a fairly difficult schedule, and I assume it's been way more difficult than Boston College's. I mean, BC, yeah, they have that one win in there against Boise. They got killed by VCU. Lost to Wake, lost to South Carolina badly, lost to SMU badly, beat Miami, who's way down this year, lost to Georgia Tech and Syracuse. So, yeah, BC has faced a much weaker schedule. Their only impressive win at all is the one against Boise, so that's pretty bad for BC. BC's not good, so laying the points with Notre Dame would be the way I would look in that one, especially because of how misleading it looks. Let me see. Wofford and Furman is kind of an interesting SoCon game, but Furman, they're going to be a fairly decent-sized favorite, up from 5.5 to 6, although you kind of expect them to be more of a favorite, with Wofford kind of being a little bit down the last few years, and Furman has a way better-looking record than Wofford, so it almost looks too easy to lay the points with Furman in that one, but to me, I think both teams are actually going to show up focused for that one. And Furman just almost lost to the Citadel coming off that big game against UNC Greensboro, which was their first loss in quite a while. So I think that hung them over a little bit. So I kind of expect them to bounce back a little bit in that game. So not a game I'm going to touch. And then I'll just point out Jackson State just because it's so hilarious. They've won 2 games now. They've won both their conference games. They're 0-13 out of conference. And I've pointed it out how difficult their schedule was. Crazy that they had absolutely no easy opponents in their non-conference schedule, except maybe Cal Baptist was the only one that wasn't really that difficult. Then they started conference play. They've been so battle tested. They start winning games. They beat Alcorn, and then they beat Alabama State. And then you look at this game against Alabama A&M is 6-10. Jackson State's 2-13, and Jackson State's laying 9.5 points in this game. I would lay the points if I was going to play it because, again, it's just one of those spreads that look so misleading, although they're actually down from 10.5 to 9.5, so the line has actually moved against them a little bit, but that's just insane that you have a 2-13 team laying almost double digits against a 6-10 team. That's just, Jackson State's not actually that bad. Their schedule has just been crazy difficult so far, so that's basically the college basketball slate. I'm not touching any of this. NHL, we got 3 games. I mean, none of these games are particularly that interesting. Chicago is coming off a really tough game against Edmonton, having to come and then play Calgary right after that. Calgary starting a road trip, which usually is a focus spot, but it's Chicago, who's not a very good team, and Calgary's coming off beating the LA Kings, so they're coming off a nice win, which was a win for me as well in that one. I played Calgary in that one, so both teams are kind of in bad spots in that one. Calgary's down from -138 to -132. 77% of tickets, 91% of the cash on them. So it looks like they do have more of the cash on them, but I would hesitate to want to play them as, again, I think both teams are kind of in bad spots. Could actually be maybe an over situation. One of my potential overs, I'm not going to do it, but kind of a situation where I kind of like to play overs. 67% of tickets and 85% of the cash on the over in that one. So it does look like some of the money is coming in on the over in that one. And that is the way that I would look in that one if I was going to play that game. Florida and Philadelphia. I mean, Florida just lost to my Boston Bruins. Huge win for the Bruins, really. And coming off of that, does that mean Florida's going to be in bounce-back mode? Maybe. They're starting a 2-game trip, but tomorrow they have to face the New Jersey Devils, which is a much bigger game than Philadelphia, so I don't know. So could be still a potential fade spot for Florida there. Philadelphia finally won against Anaheim 6-0 after they had another bad loss streak. Breaking the loss streak with a win against a team that you're not going to be that overconfident after beating, I think is a good thing for Philadelphia. So I would lean to Philadelphia on this one. Florida down from -165 to -159. 90% of tickets, 94% of the cash on Florida. Yeah, I mean, Florida's going to be very public in this one. I would lean to Philadelphia on that one. And then the one actual good game on the hockey slate is LA Kings at Edmonton. Edmonton up from -168 to -176. 80% of tickets and only 76% of the cash. So public on Edmonton with a little bit less of the cash on them. Line moving, I think, up on them a little bit, though, which is, I don't know, some conflicting indicators there. LA, again, they're coming off that loss to Calgary and getting to go out on the road, but are the Fires still going to be, or no, they're already on the road. What am I going to say? Or what am I trying to say here? They're already on the road, but I was going to say the Fires could still be maybe distracting them a little bit, but I don't know. I think that Calgary spot was really just typical sandwich spot. They'd beaten Winnipeg the game before then, and they had Edmonton up next. So they got caught, didn't play well against Calgary. Kemper wasn't in net in that one. Rittich was in net, although he hasn't been that bad either, but Kemper is their starting goalie. He's probably going to be back in net for this one. They're going to step it up a little bit for Edmonton, I would assume. So the Kings might make sense here, but Edmonton also just almost lost to Chicago. And they're returning home from a fairly long road trip. They've been on the road for like 8-9 days. So it is a bad spot for Edmonton as well because they are returning home, which I say is usually a distracted spot. But because they almost lost to Chicago and it is a good team like the Kings, those two things are still going to have Edmonton a little bit focused in this game. So tough read. I mean, there are bad things to read into as far as Edmonton's spot is concerned. I think LA is in the somewhat more positive spot there, so that's the way that I would look in that one if I was going to play it, which I'm not. And then NBA, I mean, probably the game that I would most be wanting to actually play. I mean, some of these games are just awful. Whenever you have the Raptors and the Wizards in play, I mean, that just isn't good. But Pistons-Knicks is actually an interesting game because the Pistons have actually been playing pretty well recently. The Knicks are down from 8.5 to 7. Very public, 84% of tickets, but 90% of the cash on them. But I think it might be a spot where it makes sense to take the points of Detroit in this one. I mean, they're coming up beating Toronto, which is not an impressive win. It's just a win that's going to help them have some new momentum going forward as they go into this game against the New York Knicks. The Knicks, they're coming off a game where they just crushed the Milwaukee Bucks by 34 points. I mean, you beat a good team like the Bucks by 34. You're going to be feeling pretty high on yourselves, and now you face Detroit. Maybe not a team that's going to really draw your focus. And then the Knicks have Philadelphia, who's a more complete, intact team now, and then Minnesota up next after this. So they do have bigger games up after this. So it is a little bit of a sandwich spot. It looks like, at least a letdown spot after that huge win over Milwaukee, blowout win. But I guess one hesitation would be the Knicks did just lose on December 7th at home to the same Detroit team. So that could indicate that Detroit matches up well against them, but it could also indicate the Knicks will actually still have some reason to focus here. But I would still look to take the points with the Pistons if I was going to play that one. Grizzlies and Rockets is kind of a revenge spot because the Grizzlies did just lose at home to the Rockets. So it might make sense that they would want to reverse that and have revenge against them. But in between those two games, they beat Minnesota on the road, which is a big win as well, beating Minnesota. So difficult to gauge this game, man. Will it be a revenge spot for Memphis or will it be a letdown spot coming off a big win over Minnesota? I don't know. And Houston hasn't played since that other Memphis game because that game in Atlanta was postponed for ice. So we have games being postponed for both Fire and Ice, man. It's like a George R.R. Romero novel. Is that his name? I'm out of my mind. I forget. But yeah, it's the Song of Fire and Ice, man, where all these games are getting postponed for all those reasons. It's totally stupid. But in this case, yeah, both of these teams have actually been off. No, Memphis played in between them. Never mind. What am I saying? So Houston's been off for a few days. So that could actually hurt Houston's momentum a little bit as well. So maybe Memphis would be the way to look in this game. Houston's down from 3 to 2.5, but 73% of tickets and 88% of the cash on them. So they do have more of the cash percentage right now. Very difficult to read because with extra days off like this for Houston, again, that could be disruptive. It gets to a point where you could start having your winning momentum get disrupted by being off for that long a period of time. Whereas Memphis at least got to play in the meantime, but it was a big win over Minnesota. And then you got LA and San Antonio. This is a game with a lot of huge breaks for both teams, I should say, in this one because of the stupid fires. LA hasn't played since the 7th, but they lost both games going into that break, including losing real bad to Dallas, which I don't know if that was Dallas without Luka at that point. It might have been. I think he was already out. That's a real ugly loss for the Lakers. So the fact they have all this time off and they're an old team, I think it's actually going to help them. And now they get to actually play at home, and maybe they're going to want to play, play for the fire-affected people and actually make it like a motivational statement game because they haven't played at home since all this started happening. So the Lakers side might make sense in that one. But San Antonio, they're probably going to step up to play LeBron and the Lakers as well. And they've been off since the 8th, and they went into that break on a losing note as well, losing 3 in a row. So they might use that extra time to refocus as well and fix some things. And they want to catch a win to finish this road trip off. So I could see that going both ways. Lakers are down from 4 to 3.5 in that one. We see 83% of tickets on them. It looks like they will be public. I don't know about the 100% of the cash. Doesn't really make much sense, obviously. I mean, that's not accurate, but whatever. And then Miami is at the Clippers. Clippers also, in that fire-affected situation there where obviously the Lakers get all the, kind of the coverage there, but the Clippers have been off since the 8th as well because of that. They had one game postponed, and they went into that break on a multiple-game losing streak as well, so they might be focused to show up in this game and might want to win one for LA as well. So the Clippers are kind of in a similar spot to the Lakers, or it could be a positive. Miami, they're on a nice win streak right now, but, beating Portland in their last game, I won on that one. That was... who cares about that, really? And they're already having a very successful road trip, winning 3 out of 4. And they do have the Lakers up next. Although the Clippers, aren't really a team you're going to overlook either. But Clippers laying 6.5 in this one. And I don't know, man. The Heat, as far as Jimmy Butler is concerned, he's still out. So he's not coming back yet. So interesting situation from the Heat standpoint. They're still going to be without Butler. They're just kind of rolling along here. I don't know if their travel is going to be affected by the fire. Both teams may be affected by the fire, but are the Lakers going to be a team that draws their focus a little bit more just because it is LeBron and because the Clippers have been struggling a little bit? It's an interesting thought here where it is possible that Miami might not pay attention to this game. So Clippers up from 5.5 to 6, 82% of tickets, 99% of the cash on the Clippers. I would slightly lean to the Clippers in that one. Again, I'm not going to play any of these games today. Just have a rest on Monday. I don't think any of these are strong enough, but that might be my strongest lean out of anything today. Actually, would be to lay the points with the Clippers in that game. And we'll see if I have that game gauged right. And then before I get out of here, of course, the NFL game, as I pointed out, I talked about this on my NFL show already. The game has been moved. It looked like the money was coming in on the Rams and the game was in LA. It's been moved to Arizona. It's actually at the same time. So it is still going to be a spot that is going to be very late for the Vikings as far as their biological clock is concerned. I still like the Rams in this one just because I think the experience is a huge factor in this one, even though the Vikings do have 50% of tickets, 56% of the cash. Now, the original market movement was moving towards the Rams, but then again, this now got moved to Arizona. The Rams don't really have that great of a home field advantage anyway, but Vikings having to go out to this time zone into a venue that's less familiar to them is, I think, a little bit more difficult to them. Nate, what's up, man? Thanks for showing up. I'm about to get out of here. I'm just talking about this NFL game before I get out of here. Close to being a play for me, by the way, to take the points with the Rams, especially if this thing hits 3. it might actually make sense to do it. And what the hell was I going to say? And I did say that the Rams could be part of a teaser leg if you had tied it in with Buffalo. I liked Buffalo as the other leg of that teaser, which that one was no sweat, obviously. They won in a blowout and covered easily as well. Vikings, yeah, it still could be a difficult spot for them going out to having to play a late game, very late as far as well, they're not an East Coast team, but still late as far as their biological clock is concerned. Not as difficult as the other Rams game they played where they lost, where I was on the Rams, because that was actually at LA, and it was a short turnaround time, which this isn't as much of a short turnaround time, but the Vikings did still play Sunday night. That was a huge game, man, a game that you get up emotionally for against the Detroit Lions, and you have a chance to get the 1 seed there, and you fall flat on your face like the Vikings did. I don't know if the Vikings are going to bounce back from that or not, man. I think that might have more of a hangover effect. I think that's more of a, like, crash you down to earth type of scenario. Like, yeah, we can compete with Detroit. And Detroit says, like, no way. Even though, on the other hand, that game was a lot closer than the final score looked. It was 10-6 late in the game. The Vikings stalled out in the red zone like 4 times and whatever. But still, I mean, that is the type of spot that can really shake your confidence, man. Whereas the Rams, they rested their guys in the final week, so they're going to have an extra week of rest, basically, because they played Jimmy Garoppolo instead of Stafford. I think Cooper Kupp didn't play in that game either. So the Rams are going to be more rested. But the big thing is, obviously, as I alluded to, the Rams, they have a huge amount of experience here, man. You're looking at Matthew Stafford, who's a Super Bowl champ, and he has 8 playoff wins in his career versus Sam Darnold, who has no playoff games at all in his career. So the experience is way on the Rams side here. You got Sean McVay, of course, also won that Super Bowl with Matthew Stafford, with Cooper Kupp there. I mean, those guys are all there. A lot of these guys, I think, were there for that probably. Not Puka Nacua, not Kyron Williams, I don't think, but a lot of these other guys were there. Sean McVay, obviously, that's a huge component. He was there as well. He has a bunch of playoff wins under his belt. I think he's like 7-4 in playoff games or something like that. So he's also really good in the playoffs. He's coached in 2 Super Bowls and 1-1 in those Super Bowls, lost the Jared Goff one, and then once they got Stafford there, they won a Super Bowl. So the combination of McVay and Stafford have a really good playoff record, actually, even though I know they lost last year, but that might also give them more motivation because, again, they were here last year, and I believe the Vikings were not. I think the Vikings were in the playoffs 2 years ago, and they lost, which, by the way, was Kevin O'Connell's only playoff coaching experience. He's 0-1 in the playoffs in that Kirk Cousins debacle there, where I went with the Giants in that one. I thought the Giants were the right side in that one, and they were. They won outright at Minnesota. Something tells me about this Minnesota team that they've overperformed this year, and they just, again, they lack experience. So something was telling me the Vikings would lose to Detroit there, and something tells me it's a wild card playoff exit for the Vikings in this one. That's basically what my thought has been this whole time. And again, the Rams, obviously, they have a ton of experience, as I was just pointing out. Pretty good track record in the playoffs as well. Good playoff pedigree on this Rams team. And the Rams defense actually shockingly started playing a lot better down the stretch, too, after they were playing pretty poorly throughout a lot of the season, even though they beat the Vikings at a point where where the Rams were playing pretty poor defense as well. And then on the other side of things, the Rams offense is built to match up pretty well against this Vikings defense, man. The Vikings, they're a very blitz-heavy defensive attack, and the Rams, they're very good at beating the blitz. Matthew Stafford is very good at beating the blitz because the Rams have those 2 receivers who work out of the slot a ton in Kupp and Nacua, so they have a lot of quick, like, short dropbacks, like 1-step, 2-step dropbacks, short passes, dump it off to the wide receivers and let them get a lot of yards after the catch. That's a really good way to beat the blitz. The Rams have a lot of offensive plays in the playbook that can beat the blitz. That's what they do. That's part of the reason they beat the Vikings that first time. And I think the Rams did have both their wide receivers back. I think that was the first time they came back, actually, for both of those. So interesting there. And that's it, man. And then we'll talk about the divisional playoffs coming up. We do have lines out on 2 or 3 of the games, actually, where we have Chiefs are already up from 7.5 to 8 against the Texans, although, well, we'll talk about it when we get there. But my first instinct would be to lean to the Texans in that one because the Chiefs have had way too much rest, in my opinion, at this point. We'll talk about that when we get there. But they really have, I don't think they've played since Christmas, if I remember correctly, like Mahomes and company. So that's a little bit crazy. You could see a little bit of rust in that one. And then Washington against the Lions. The Lions, of course, played basically a playoff game already against the Vikings. So I think that's going to be less of an effect with the Lions having the bye here. I don't think it's going to affect the Lions as much. Lions already down from 9.5 to 9 in that one, but I'm not so sure that I would want to fade the Lions in that particular game. And then the Ravens have already flipped from a 1-point dog to a 1-point road favorite against the Bills. Odds makers telling you the Ravens are actually multiple points better than the Bills, and I actually do agree with that. So the Ravens might be the right side in that one. And people might value the Bills a little bit too much after seeing them wreck the Broncos. Or the Broncos are a pretty hyped team, and a lot of people were thinking that game was going to be competitive. I was saying probably not because you get a rookie quarterback going on the road, although I know Jaden Daniels won in that spot and beat me last night. Terrible. But, I mean, the Broncos, yeah, they got torched. They had no shot there. But the Ravens, they're an extremely dangerous team. And over the recent years, I think they've actually done a little bit better in the playoffs than the Bills have, maybe. Or the Rams, well, I don't know. There's just a knock on Lamar Jackson that he can't get over the hump. But I think he might be able to get this game done against the Bills here. The Ravens have an extremely explosive offense, and their defense has started playing pretty well. And I think the Ravens might be better on both sides of the ball than the Bills. So that's kind of my first look there. The Ravens might actually be the best play of those three games. I kind of like that, and it's kind of one of those switch points in your bracket where I think too many people are picking the Bills and not enough people are picking the Ravens because, oh, Lamar Jackson can't win in the playoffs. Okay, whatever. I mean, he won one game, but I mean, obviously he's won in the wild card round before, but he has not won these bigger games. Although last year they did win. Didn't they win 2 games last year? They got to the conference championship last year, so I think they won 2 games. Or no, they had a bye, so they won. They did win in the divisional round last year, but that was their only win because they had a bye the prior week. That's what it was. They were the 1 seed. All right, never mind. Yeah, Baker, fuck him, dude. I don't know what that was. I mean, they've been doing handoffs all year, dude. I mean, the Buccaneers had a good rushing attack this year, which was a huge part of that handicap. They should be able to get some things going on the ground. Obviously, they could have won that game for me. Whatever. And that's going to do it, man. And again, I think public is probably going to weigh the Ravens win over the Steelers less. Oh, they only beat the Steelers by 14, and the Steelers are ass. Whereas everybody was hyping the Broncos with Bo Nix and whatever. The Bills blew them out of the stadium. So the public, to me, seems like they're going to be on the Bills to too much of an extent in that one. That's going to do it for me for now, man. No plays today. Tower Gang Toad, once again on Twitter. Follow the Tower Gang Podcast, the most offensive, hilarious podcast on the planet. Patreon.com/Tower Gang. Give us some support, and you get live pre-show, post-show, bonus content. Hang out with us in the Telegram. Submit to the mailbag. That's going to do it. Have a good one. Let's have a good Monday, and peace out.